I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate lace of my wedding dress, the final touches of my makeup flawlessly applied. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and in many ways it was. The venue was perfect, my groom was hopelessly in love with me, and my mother, my rock, my guiding force, was right by my side, ensuring that everything went according to plan. Ethan and I had been together for 3 years before he proposed, and while I loved him, I had always known that I could have done better. He was dependable, sweet, and devoted to me, but he lacked the ambition, the presence, the power that I had envisioned in my future husband. He worked a steady job in real estate, making enough to afford a comfortable lifestyle, but not the luxury I had grown up with. That was why my mother had her doubts about him from the start. "Madison, you need someone who will elevate you, not just keep you comfortable," she had warned countless times. But love had a funny way of blinding people, didn't it? The wedding ceremony itself was flawless. I walked down the aisle, my mother beaming proudly at me, while Ethan's eyes were filled with an adoration so strong it almost made me question my decision. Almost. But the real moment of satisfaction came when we arrived at the airport for our honeymoon. Ethan, excited and unsuspecting, rolled our luggage up to the check-in counter, his smile boyish and eager. My mother and I exchanged a knowing glance before I turned to him and, as casually as possible, handed him the neatly printed train ticket. "My company only provides 2 business-class tickets," I explained smoothly, my voice laced with faux regret. "So my mom and I are flying ahead. You'll take the train and meet us there." His smile faltered, but I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to rationalize my decision. Ethan wasn't stupid, but he was trusting, too trusting. He believed in us, in me, in our marriage. He thought I respected him the way he respected me. He was wrong. I had spent months planning every detail of this trip with my mother, ensuring that everything would be perfect for us. Ethan was an afterthought, a necessary piece to the puzzle, but not the centerpiece. This honeymoon wasn't just about celebrating my marriage. It was about solidifying my future, positioning myself in a way that would ensure I could still live the life I deserved. My mother had made sure of that. But what I hadn't expected was his reaction. He didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't even try to reason with me. He simply took the ticket from my hand, met my gaze with a calm, almost chilling look and said, "You will regret this." And then, with nothing more than a quiet nod, he turned around, picked up his luggage and walked away. For a moment I stood there, feeling an unfamiliar twist of unease in my stomach. I had expected resistance, anger, frustration, something, but instead I got silence. "Madison, let it go." My mother's voice cut through my thoughts as she placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "He'll come around. He always does." And she was right, wasn't she? Ethan always forgave me, always did what was expected. He would board that train, sulk for a few hours, and then meet us at the resort just like I had planned. I forced a smile and nodded, shaking off the lingering discomfort. "You're right, Mom. He'll be there." With that, we walked toward our gate, my heels clicking against the pristine airport floors, ready to start the honeymoon we had planned. Or so I thought, because an hour later, just as we were about to board, my phone buzzed in my hand. A message from the airline. "Your reservation has been canceled." Panic surged through me as I rushed to the counter, my mother trailing behind, demanding answers from the airline staff. The attendant, looking slightly overwhelmed, double-checked the system before nodding apologetically. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the booking was made under your husband's name. The primary cardholder canceled all tickets associated with the reservation earlier today." My breath hitched. "What do you mean, canceled?" I demanded, my voice rising. "That's impossible. There has to be a mistake." "No mistake, ma'am," the attendant replied calmly. "Your husband voided the entire booking. You no longer have seats on this flight." The weight of Ethan's last words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You will regret this." And for the first time I realized, maybe I already did. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I clutched my phone, my fingers trembling against the screen. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. The airline agent was wrong. Ethan wouldn't do this. He couldn't do this. He was always level-headed, dependable, predictable. He didn't pull stunts like this. And yet, as I stared at the words on the airline screen, "reservation canceled," I knew this wasn't some clerical mistake. Ethan had done it. He had actually canceled our honeymoon tickets. My honeymoon. The one my mother and I had planned down to the finest detail. The one he was supposed to follow along with obediently like he always did. Fix this, my mother snapped, her face twisted with irritation as she turned to the airline agent. There must be something you can do. Put us back on the flight. The agent gave her a sympathetic yet firm shake of the head. I'm very sorry, ma'am, but since the tickets were booked under his name and he was the primary payer, he had the right to cancel them. The flight is also fully booked now, so even if you repurchase tickets, you'll have to wait for the next available flight tomorrow. Tomorrow? Tomorrow? That was unacceptable. This was my honeymoon, and I was supposed to be sipping cocktails by the beach in less than 6 hours. The hotel suite was reserved, the couple's massages were scheduled. Everything was meticulously planned. This is ridiculous. I snapped. You can't just let him do this. He canceled our tickets out of spite. The agent didn't seem moved. I understand, ma'am, but there's nothing we can do. I let out a frustrated sound, gripping my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. My mother sighed and pulled me aside, lowering her voice. Call Ethan, she ordered. Fix this. Now. I nodded, already dialing. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm, almost amused. Yes. I clenched my jaw. What the hell did you do, Ethan? A pause. Then in that maddeningly even tone of his he said, I canceled the tickets. Why? I hissed. Are you out of your mind? No, Madison, he replied smoothly. I just decided to take your advice. We're traveling separately. I felt the blood drain from my face. This isn't funny, Ethan. Book new tickets. Right now. Can't do that, he said, completely unfazed. I already left town. My heart slammed against my ribs. Left town? Where are you? He chuckled lightly. Wouldn't you like to know? I felt my mother's sharp gaze on me as she waited for an answer. I couldn't let her see me losing control. Ethan, I said, lowering my voice to a dangerously thin whisper. You need to fix this. We are supposed to be on our honeymoon. Do you realize how embarrassing this is? Embarrassing for you? His voice turned cold. You mean like being handed a train ticket while your wife and her mother fly first class? That kind of embarrassing. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. That was different. No, Madison, he said sharply. It really wasn't. But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to think about that on the train. If you can even get a ticket now. And with that he hung up. I stared at my phone in shock. My mother's voice cut through the haze. What did he say? I looked up, my heart still hammering in my chest. He's gone. She narrowed her eyes. Gone? Gone where? I had no answer. And for the first time in our relationship I realized Ethan wasn't playing my game anymore. I stood there, gripping my phone so tightly that my fingers turned white, my heart slamming against my ribs. This was not how things were supposed to go. Ethan was supposed to be upset, sure, maybe even a little moody, but he wasn't supposed to disappear. He wasn't supposed to cancel our flights. He wasn't supposed to fight back. Madison. My mother's sharp tone cut through the fog of my spiraling thoughts. What do you mean he's gone? I swallowed hard, forcing down the rising panic. I don't know. He said he left town. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing. He's bluffing. Maybe. Ethan was dependable, predictable. He never acted irrationally, never made rash decisions. But the calm certainty in his voice when he said he had already left chilled me. My mother grabbed my wrist, dragging me a few steps away from the counter, lowering her voice. Listen to me. He's trying to scare you. He's punishing you for choosing me over him, and we are not going to let him win. I nodded automatically, but my mind was racing. Was that what this was? A power play? The thought made my stomach churn. Ethan had always been the one who bent, who forgave, who let things slide. But the way he had spoken to me, the way he had laughed, something had shifted. Mom, what do we do? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She let out a slow breath, composing herself. First, we book another flight. We'll charge it to my card if we have to. I turned back to the airline agent, but before I could say anything, she shook her head. Ma'am, I already informed you that the flight is full. There are no seats left. My stomach twisted. Not even economy? Not even standby? A loud, frustrated breath escaped my mother. Fine. We'll fly out first thing tomorrow. Book us on the earliest flight. The agent nodded and began typing. I tried to steady my breathing, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Tomorrow. We had to wait until tomorrow. And in the meantime, Ethan was gone. My phone buzzed. My heart leaped as I yanked it out of my purse, hoping it was Ethan, hoping he had come to his senses. But it wasn't him. It was Ava. Ava had been one of my closest friends since college, but she had also been one of Ethan's biggest defenders. She thought I was too hard on him, too controlling. I had ignored her subtle digs, choosing to believe she simply didn't understand the dynamic of our relationship. Now her message was short and direct. Where is Ethan? I hesitated before typing back. Why? Her reply came almost instantly. Because he just posted a picture of himself on a beach, drinking a cocktail. And unless you two had a major schedule change, I don't think you're there with him. The blood drained from my face. Even on a beach? Drinking? Without me? I quickly opened Instagram and found his page. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. Ethan reclining in a lounge chair, sunglasses on, a drink in his hand, his feet buried in white sand. The caption? Best honeymoon ever. A honeymoon without me. I felt like I had been slapped. What? My mother asked, catching my reaction. I wordlessly turned the screen toward her. Her face darkened. That little. She cut herself off, exhaling harshly. He's doing this on purpose. Trying to humiliate you. And we are not going to let that happen. But I barely heard her. Because as I stared at the image, my eyes locked on a small reflection in his sunglasses. A woman. Standing next to him that I couldn't breathe. My grip on the phone tightened as I stared at the image, my eyes locked onto the faint but unmistakable reflection in Ethan's sunglasses. A woman. It was blurry, distorted by the curve of the lenses, but she was there. Standing close. Too close. Madison. My mother's voice was sharp, cutting through my spiraling thoughts. What is it? I turned the screen toward her with a shaky hand, my voice barely above a whisper. Look. She squinted, then inhaled sharply. Who the hell is that? I didn't have an answer. Ava texted again. Do you know who he's with? I typed back quickly, my fingers unsteady. No. Can you find out? Seconds later she responded. Already on it. I barely noticed as my mother pulled me aside, gripping my arm. Listen to me. This is exactly what he wants, to make you jealous, to make you chase him. He wants to punish you for what happened at the airport. I swallowed hard. Was that true? I had never known Ethan to be vengeful, but then again I had never seen this version of him before. The calm, almost smug man who had told me he already left. The one who had posted this picture. I need to talk to him, I muttered. No, my mother snapped. You need to focus. We'll get on the first flight tomorrow, and when we get there we'll handle this properly. But I wasn't sure I could wait that long. I called Ethan. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Panic started creeping in. Not just because of the woman, but because this wasn't like him. Ethan had always been available. Even when we fought, he picked up my calls. Even when he was angry, he never shut me out completely. This time he had. Ava called. I answered immediately. Tell me you found something. I did, she said, her voice cautious. I wasn't sure at first, but I just checked the tagged photos from the same location he posted from. Someone else posted a story, and I think I know who she is. I held my breath. Who? Ava hesitated. Madison, you're not gonna like this. Just tell me. She sighed. It's Olivia. The ground beneath me tilted. My stomach clenched. No, I breathed. That's not possible. It's her, Ava insisted. She's at the same resort and she's posting pictures, drinks, the beach, everything. But she hasn't posted him yet. I felt cold all over. Olivia. My Olivia. Well, technically our Olivia. She and Ethan had worked together for nearly 2 years. They got along well, too well if you asked me. She was beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who knew she turned heads. But she was also my friend. She had been at our wedding. No, I repeated, shaking my head. She's engaged. Ava was quiet for a moment before she said, not anymore. My knees nearly buckled. What? I croaked. She and her fiancé broke up last month. Apparently, he called off the wedding. I felt my mother stiffen beside me, hearing every word. That doesn't mean. I stopped myself because I wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. It didn't mean Ethan and Olivia were together. It didn't mean anything. Except it did. Because Ethan never did anything impulsively. If he was with Olivia, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It meant something had been happening, and I had been too blind to see it. My phone buzzed again. A new message. Ethan, lose my number. A strangled sound escaped my throat. No, this wasn't just him getting back at me. This wasn't just a power move. This was something else entirely. And for the first time, I felt real fear settle deep in my bones. Because I had just lost control of something I thought I would always be able to manipulate. The airport around me blurred into meaningless shapes and colors. My fingers trembled as I stared at Ethan's last message. Lose my number. No anger. No hesitation. No invitation for a fight. Just a clean, brutal severance. I had underestimated him. Ava's voice in my ear felt distant. Madison? Are you okay? No. I wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. Olivia. Ethan. The sudden shift in control. It was all slipping away faster than I could grab hold of it. I need a second, I mumbled, pulling away from my mother's grasp. Madison, she snapped, her tone edged with steel. We don't have time for this. You need to get ahead of this now before he turns this whole situation against you. But he already had. I turned away, pressing a hand to my forehead, willing myself to breathe. The logical part of me wanted to believe this was just Ethan lashing out, making a scene, trying to hurt me the way he thought I hurt him. But something deeper, something more instinctual, whispered a darker truth. He wasn't coming back. This wasn't just a tantrum. It wasn't a temporary rebellion. He had walked away, and I had no idea how to stop him. Ava's voice returned, softer this time. Matt, I don't think this is just about what happened at the airport. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? A pause. I think Ethan was done with you long before today. The words cut sharper than I expected. That's not true. Isn't it? Ava pressed. You've been walking all over him for years, Madison. I told you he wouldn't take it forever. Maybe you didn't see this coming, but he did. And maybe, just maybe, so did Olivia. I bristled. You think he was cheating on me? Ava exhaled. I don't know. But I think you do. No, I snapped. Ethan isn't like that. But even as I said it, doubt wormed its way into my chest. Ethan had never been the type to cheat, but neither had he been the type to leave me. And yet, here we were. I pulled up Olivia's social media, my hands moving on autopilot. Her profile was private, but her stories were still visible. A picture of the ocean, a cocktail, a sunset view from a luxury villa. No Ethan. But that didn't mean anything. I clicked on one of her old posts, a group photo from a work event months ago. Ethan stood in the background, smiling, relaxed, oblivious. Olivia was beside him, her body angled ever so slightly toward him. Not enough to seem obvious. But now, in hindsight, too much. Had I been blind? No. I had been careless. I had spent so much time testing Ethan, so much time pushing him to see how far he would bend for me, that I had never stopped to consider what would happen if he finally broke. And now he had. And he hadn't just left me. He had replaced me. My mother's nails dug into my arm. Pull yourself together, Madison. I blinked at her, disoriented. What? She gave me a sharp look. You are not going to let some secretary steal your husband and humiliate you. You are going to get on that flight tomorrow, and you are going to fix this. The words should have steadied me. Instead, they felt suffocating. Because for the first time I realized I might not be able to fix this. For the first time I had no idea what to do. And for the first time I was truly afraid that I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's text flashing behind my eyelids. Lose my number. I had spent years training Ethan to come back, to be patient, to accept that my wants came first. I had built our relationship on the foundation that he would always forgive me, always choose me. But this time he hadn't. This time he had chosen himself. And Olivia. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach as I sat in the dim light of the hotel room my mother had booked for us after the disaster at the airport. I scrolled through Olivia's social media again, searching for anything. A hint, a slip-up, a confirmation that she was with Ethan. But she had been careful. Too careful. That only made me more certain. At 5 a.m. my mother shook my shoulder. Get up. We're getting on the first flight out. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. And then what? Her lips thinned. Then we handle this. I didn't ask what she meant. My mother had always been the one to fix things for me. This was just another mess to clean up. At the airport I checked my phone obsessively. Still no calls. No messages. No apology from Ethan. As we boarded the plane, my fingers hovered over his contact. I hesitated, then typed. We need to talk. The message sent. No response. I stared at the little delivered mark, willing it to change to red. Nothing. I put my phone on airplane mode as we took off. My mother flipped through a magazine beside me, acting as if none of this was falling apart. As if I wasn't falling apart. 3 hours later we landed. The warm, salty air of the resort town greeted us as we stepped out of the airport. It should have smelled like paradise. Instead, it smelled like humiliation. Ava texted the moment I turned my phone back on. He hasn't posted anything new. But Olivia tagged the resort in her latest picture. I clenched my jaw. He was here. I swallowed back my anger. If I let it take over, I would lose control completely. And I couldn't afford that, not now. I turned to my mother. Where's the hotel? She had already booked us a room at the same resort, of course. She always thought ahead. Let's go, I said. She nodded approvingly. That's my girl. But for the first time I wasn't sure I wanted to be her girl anymore. For the first time I wasn't sure I was going to win. And for the first time I was terrified of what I was about to find. The ride from the airport to the resort felt suffocating. Every passing palm tree, every glimpse of the turquoise ocean that should have been part of my perfect honeymoon, felt like a cruel joke. My mother sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, muttering about incompetent men and how Ethan was making a spectacle of himself. I barely heard her. All I could think about was Olivia. Her smile, the way she leaned just a little too close to Ethan at work events, the casual touches I had dismissed as friendly. Had I really been so blind? Or had I just assumed that Ethan would never dare? I pulled up Olivia's latest post, my stomach twisting. It wasn't much. Just a view of the resort's infinity pool, her drink on the table beside her. But in the reflection of the glass, barely visible, was him. Ethan. I clenched my jaw, gripping my phone so tightly my nails dug into my palm. He wasn't even hiding anymore. The driver pulled up to the resort entrance, and I barely waited for him to stop before stepping out. The grand lobby stretched before me, open air with sweeping views of the ocean. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of place I had dreamed of. But all I felt was rage. The woman at the front desk smiled. Welcome to. We have a reservation. My mother cut in, her voice clipped. Madison and Eleanor Caldwell. The receptionist checked the system, then nodded. Ah yes, Miss Caldwell. Your suite is ready. Shall I have your bags brought up? I ignored her, my eyes scanning the lounge. Couples lounged on plush chairs, sipping drinks, lost in their own worlds. None of them were him. I need to find someone, I said. Ethan Carter. He checked in recently. The receptionist blinked, startled. I'm sorry, but we can't give out guest information. I exhaled sharply, turning to my mother. Go to the room. I'll be back. Her lips pursed in disapproval, but she nodded. Handle this. I walked away before she could say more, my pulse hammering. I didn't know where I was going. Only that I needed to see him. I found the bar first. And there he was. Sitting at an outdoor table, the ocean stretching behind him. Ethan looked different. Relaxed. At ease. A drink in his hand, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. He was laughing. And Olivia was right beside him. The sound of my own heartbeat roared in my ears. For a moment I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then, as if sensing me, Ethan turned. Our eyes met. And instead of guilt or panic or even anger, he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Like he had one. And I realized with a sinking feeling, maybe he had. The world around me faded. The sound of waves crashing against the shore, the clinking of glasses, the distant hum of resort guests chatting. It all disappeared. All I could hear was the deafening silence between me and Ethan as his gaze met mine across the bar. And then that smile. Not one of regret. Not an awkward, guilt-ridden grimace. No, Ethan smiled like a man who had nothing to fear. Like a man who had moved on. Like a man who had won. Beside him, Olivia glanced up from her drink, her expression shifting the moment she saw me. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time I saw it, the hesitation, the flicker of doubt in her usually confident eyes. Good. I took a slow step forward, heels digging into the wooden deck beneath me. My heart pounded, my fists clenched at my sides, but I refused to let them see it. I wouldn't let him see it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. He gestured lazily toward the empty seat across from him. Madison. Didn't expect to see you here. I swallowed down the bitterness rising in my throat. Didn't expect to be here. Olivia shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Ethan took a slow sip of his drink, watching me with an amusement that made my skin crawl. Didn't take you long to book a flight. You didn't leave me much of a choice. Didn't I? He mused, tilting his head slightly. I ignored the way my stomach twisted. We need to talk. Alone. Olivia stiffened beside him. Ethan. It's fine, he said, standing effortlessly. He gave her a small nod before turning back to me. Let's walk. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to move, to follow him down the wooden pathway toward the beach. The setting sun cast long shadows, stretching his figure before me. The moment we were far enough from prying eyes, I turned on him. What the hell is this? Ethan slid his hands into his pockets, glancing out at the waves. What does it look like? It looks like you're trying to humiliate me. He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Madison, if I wanted to humiliate you, I would have done it years ago. My jaw clenched. You left. You canceled our flights. You posted that picture. He turned to me then, his blue eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. And you handed me a train ticket on my honeymoon. The word struck harder than I wanted to admit. I swallowed, my voice lower. So this is revenge? Ethan's lips pressed together in thought before he answered. No. This is me finally realizing I don't need to be your afterthought anymore. My chest tightened. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? His voice cut through mine, firm, unwavering. Madison, I spent 3 years letting you treat me like I was lucky to have you. I bent over backward to make you happy. And what did I get in return? I opened my mouth but nothing came out. You humiliated me, Madison. His voice was quieter now, but it held more weight. You made it clear where I stood with you. And I believed it. Until I didn't. The air between us thickened. I forced myself to meet his gaze. And Olivia? That was sudden. Ethan exhaled slowly, looking past me toward the horizon. Not as sudden as you think. The implication slammed into me like a freight train. I took a shaky step back. You were seeing her? His gaze didn't waver. I was not cheating on you. But I was done with you before you even realized it. His voice was calm, steady. And Olivia? She saw it before I did. I felt sick. He had already checked out of our marriage. And I had been too blind to see it. My throat tightened. So that's it? You replace me, and I'm just supposed to accept it. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't have to accept anything, Madison. But I have. I stared at him, my carefully crafted world crumbling around me. For the first time I saw him as he was now, not the man who used to worship me. Not the husband I controlled. But a man who had made his choice. And it wasn't me. I stepped back, my heart hammering. You'll regret this. Ethan's lips quirked into something almost like pity. That's what you told me at the airport. He turned, walking away without another word. And this time he didn't look back. That I stood there, barefoot in the cooling sand, watching Ethan walk away. The waves crashed behind me, the warm ocean breeze tangling through my hair. But I felt nothing. Nothing except the weight of realization settling over me like an iron cage. Ethan was gone. Not just from this conversation. Not just from this fight. He was gone. And I had never considered, never even imagined, that I wouldn't be the one walking away first. I forced myself to turn, to follow the path back toward the resort. My mother was already waiting for me outside the lounge, arms crossed, impatience radiating from her like heat off the pavement. "Well?" she demanded. I shook my head. "He's not coming back." Her nostrils flared. "Then you fix it. You're his wife." "Not anymore," I muttered, my voice hollow. Her sharp eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic, Madison. This is just a phase. Men think they have power the moment a woman gives them a little space. You pull him back in." I swallowed, hating the way my voice cracked. "I don't think I can." For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. "Then what the hell are you doing here?" I didn't have an answer. Maybe I had come thinking I could shame him into obedience, force him into guilt, make him see that he belonged with me. Maybe I had assumed he would cave like he always had. But he hadn't. And now I was standing in the ruins of a war I had already lost. My mother exhaled sharply. "Then go back in there, smile like nothing is wrong, and make sure everyone knows you left him. Not the other way around." I stared at her. "You want me to act like I don't care?" "I want you to win," she hissed. "If you can't have him, you can at least make sure you don't look like the pathetic wife who got dumped for her husband's coworker." Something inside me cracked. I had spent my whole life chasing my mother's version of winning, always controlling the narrative, always making sure I was the one with power, always staying one step ahead. And now, standing here in this mess, a mess I had created, I realized for the first time that maybe I had never been winning at all. Maybe I had just been holding on to something that was never really mine. I turned away from her. "I'm done." Her expression twisted. "Excuse me." "I'm done," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. "You wanted me to marry a man I could control." "I did. But I never thought about what would happen if he stopped letting me." She grabbed my wrist, her nails digging in. "You are not walking away from this looking like a fool, Madison." I yanked free from her grasp, something hot and furious rising in my chest. "I already look like a fool, Mom." Her lips curled, voice dripping with disdain. "You always were weak when things didn't go your way." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, I was weak because I let you control me the way I tried to control him." For the first time, her expression faltered. Just for a moment. Then she straightened. "So what? You're going to sulk while he parades around with his new toy? You're going to let Olivia win?" I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. Olivia. The woman I had dismissed, overlooked, ignored. The woman Ethan had chosen instead. I had spent years convincing myself Ethan would always be mine, that he was too loyal, too comfortable to ever leave me. And yet, when given the choice, when finally pushed too far, he had walked away. And I had been the fool who let him. I took a slow, steady breath. Let her have him. My mother's eyes widened slightly. "You can't be serious." I met her gaze, my voice quiet. "I don't think I ever really had him, Mom." She opened her mouth, probably to argue, to tell me all the ways I could still fix this, to manipulate the situation in my favor. But I didn't care anymore. I turned and walked past her, through the resort entrance, ignoring the knowing looks from the guests who had probably already pieced together what had happened. Let them whisper. Let them talk. I had already lost. And for the first time in my life, I was done pretending I hadn't. I sat at the airport bar. The rim of my untouched cocktail pressed against my lips, the ice melting into watered-down regret. My flight back home wasn't for another 3 hours, but I couldn't bear to spend another second in that resort. Not with them still there. Ethan and Olivia. The couple who had once been my husband and my friend. I had seen them again as I left. Olivia's hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. His head tilted toward hers in quiet conversation. They weren't flaunting it, weren't making a spectacle of their newfound freedom. Because they didn't need to. The real humiliation wasn't in their public displays. It was in the way Ethan hadn't even looked for me as I walked away. He was done. And there was nothing I could do to fix it. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years making Ethan believe I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I had held all the power, dictated the rules, controlled every aspect of our relationship. And yet here I was, alone. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat, but I swallowed it down with a sip of my drink. My mother had left hours ago, too disgusted with me to stick around for the fallout. She had barely spoken after our last conversation, her silence louder than any lecture she could have given me. You let him win. But had he won? Had Olivia? Or had I simply lost so badly that it didn't even matter? I pulled out my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media. I half expected Ethan to have blocked me, but his profile was still there, untouched, as if I had never existed in his world. No new posts. No more pictures from the beach. I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. I hesitated before tapping on Olivia's page. Her most recent story was just a sunset over the ocean, a cocktail in hand. No captions. No hints. But I knew. She had one. And I had no one to blame but myself. I sat there for what felt like forever. The chatter of the airport buzzing around me. The weight of my choices pressing down on my shoulders. Then my phone vibrated. A message. For a brief, pathetic second my heart jumped. Maybe Ethan had finally reached out. Maybe he had something left to say. But it wasn't him. It was Ava. He's not coming back, Mads. You know that, right? I exhaled slowly. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I told the truth. Yeah, I know. I finished my drink, grabbed my bag and headed toward my gate. This was over. And I had finally accepted it. The end.